We've seen the gross here.
Yeah.
And we've got another rig.
This one is one that I've built in the last 4 or 5 years. It uses an 860
Right.
tetrode, and I'd never used one before. And somebody told me, says, "Well, you got to use that. You got to do this and that and the other thing. It'll work fine." Bud Hall uses them. And I said, "But I couldn't get it to work." "Well, what are you doing?" He said, "Well, it'll never work that way." And he told me how to work it, and boy, it's been trouble-free.
Wow.
And so all it is a 47,
Okay.
a 210,
Okay.
and the 860.
Okay.
That's all. And I drive it with the VFO that clips right on here.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is your power supply in back of it?
Those are power supplies for this whole damn thing. That's the only thing that's the problem with something like this. It takes power supplies and power supplies and power supplies.
Oh yeah.
Well, 1, 2, 3 different filament voltages.
And what's the plate voltage on the 860?
It's rated to run 3,000 volts, but I run it 1,600 volts is all. It's trouble-free.
Now, was this a design that you would come up with, John, or was this something that you
No,
had?
this is something I just laid up.
And I see you've got your favorite national capacitors in there.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
And it works beautifully. It worked fine from the time I plugged it in. I couldn't believe it. Usually I build something and then I spend the next 3 months trying to make it work. Tune plate, tune grid. This is the grid tune circuit. And those are made up from single 140 picofarad capacitors. Marshall must have had those by the dozens and dozens, as they were in RCA receivers. And gosh, he gave me half a dozen, which I've used. And Parker's got a bunch, etc. But I found that there are 140 picofarad if they're complete, and I can turn a new shaft for them, and then make new spacers for this, and insulators and spacers for the bottom, and there you've got a tune grid.
You've got a trick to winding up the copper tubing.
It's a lot of people think so, but it isn't really.
How do you do it?
Well, first of all, I have either 2.5 or 3 inch plastic tubing. All right. Then one end of the tubing, I flatten out and drill a hole in it, and then that goes through a pin on the coil form, and then I pull it out tight, and I wind it up a step at a time, tight all the time, and with these up tight like that.
Okay.
And the secret is to keep the whole things tight. Then after you've got, in this case, for 80 meters it takes about 12 turns, so I make 13 turns on it. And then after you've got it ready, then I'll take a screwdriver that has a long, like about a 1/4 inch shaft on it. and I poke that through one end to the other, and then I work it through the whole thing, and that spreads this out very evenly, very uniformly. And that's all there is to it. It's quite easy.
Understand you caught a helicopter one day.
Yes, unfortunately I did.
Can you tell us about it?
All right. The two antennas went across this marsh that's down below the house. And the two antennas went clear across the marsh to the other side. And a Navy helicopter came around one day. They were looking for somebody that had pitched off the bridge. And for some reason they came in here, and they came in, well, they must have come in about 50 feet. And they snagged that first wire, and I was in the cellar at the time, and I heard this pop, 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 pop going around, and then I heard this burst of power, and I said, oh Jesus, what the hell's that? So I stuck my head out just in time to see him rounding out just above the cattails like that, you know. And all I could think of was, my God, that must have given him an awful sinking feeling. Because, first of all, he had to catch the wire, and then that wire was pulled up. It had a 130 pound counterweight at the far end. So it had to pull up 138 pounds all the way up to 100 feet, tugging on this wire, you know. And then when it gets up to the top like that, the wire breaks, and all of a sudden he shot out like that, you know, and I thought, oh my God. But he recovered. Then he pulled up and he started circling all around. I hid behind a tree. And he started circling all around, all around, all around. And of course it was a V-beam, so there were two wires like that. This was the one he caught. He went underneath that one and didn't touch that at all. But anyway, for a week or two after that, every day I used to think, well, is the letter going to come today from the Navy? And they never wrote about it. But gee whiz, that gave me an awful start.